Let's get set up for the external shot for our jump to hyperspace. Let's select the cube, press X to delete it. And the Xwing model that's linked in the description is a GLB file. So let's go to File, Import. So I'm going to go into my downloads and find that model. And we'll just import that. All right, so with the model imported, let's spin this around so it's facing the positive direction. If we select the model in the outliner, we should be able to press RZ180. So now let's get our camera set up. We can select the camera here, press Alt-R and Alt-G, and that just resets the location and the rotation, putting it in the center of the world. So we can press RX90 to make that face the positive Y. And then we can press G for grab, press Y lock on the Y axis and pull that back behind the Xwing. With tilde, we can go into the view camera and we can press GZZ to pull that back even further. Now that's dead center in the shot. Let's press GZ once just to go up just a little bit, just so we start to see a bit more of that shape of the Xwing. Let's press Z to get the shading pie menu, go up to rendered, and you can see what the materials look like on that Xwing. These lights I want to enhance a bit actually because they're not very bright, and I'm going to want to add bloom as well so that they glow. So we can press Shift A, bring in a point light, press GY to pull that back, and let's go into the back view rather than the front view. And let's just arrange that light just in line with these engines. In the object data properties, let's change the color to be that same red and use the eyedropper to select it. And we can try increasing the power to maybe 100 for now. Let's pull that light so that it's in line with the engine itself, and it'll make that glow. So let's Alt-D to duplicate that and press X to snap on the X axis. And we'll just move that over and do the same thing for the two lights. We can select them in the outliner and then again go to the front and Alt-D those to pull them down, pressing Z to lock on the Z axis. So that's looking pretty good. Really quick, we can split this screen and go into the compositor, and let's just add a glare node really quick. And we'll set that to high quality bloom or fog glow. And in the shading dropdown, go to compositor always. And now we've got our glow. It's a bit big, so we can reduce the size a bit. That's looking pretty good. So for the jump, we're going to move this along the Y axis. These lights will have to follow it, so we'll want to parent the lights to the ship itself. So let's add in an empty, and I'm going to give this a sphere. And this whole sketch fab model, I'm going to parent to that empty. So click that in the outliner and then Control or Command click the empty and press Command P and keep transform. And now anytime we move the empty, we'll move the whole ship. You'll notice that the lights stay where they are. So let's grab those point lights. We can click once in the outliner, Shift click the last one to select all of them. And then what we can do is the same thing. I'll just Shift click the empty, Control P, keep transform. Now everything moves with that empty. So we'll essentially only be animating the empty. There's one more thing I want to do with that empty is the camera is a little too low. I might pull that in just a little bit with GZZ. But what I want to do is be able to rotate that camera a little bit so that we're looking down the fuselage a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the camera and I'm going to add a track 2 constraint. And I'll target the empty. So now if we go into the camera view and press GZ, you'll notice that it looks at that empty. So this is just a really quick way to let us look at a bit more of the top of the Xwing. Beautiful. Let's bump that glare just a little bit. Maybe what we should do before we mess with lights more is go into the world and turn the strength down to 0 so that's pitch black. And you can Alt-Shift-Z to turn off the lines. It's the same as just clicking this button up here. But that gives you a better sense of what it looks like. So we might want a bit of lighting to light the rim of the ship. So let's try doing that now. Let's Shift A and bring in maybe a sun. And with the sun selected, let's press R and X to start rotating that along the X axis. And you can see the effect that it has. It does light up the back of the ship a bit more, which I like that. Brings a lot of that out of shadow. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so this is in pretty good shape. Eventually we'll want to set up the star field in the background, but before we do that, let's figure out how far this is going to need to travel to make it look like it's going really fast into hyperspace. So let's start animating this. Again, we'll only be animating the empty, so we'll select that. And if we press Shift K, we can select the active keying set. That means anytime we use the shortcut I, it will only add keys for these specific keying sets. And I do want to affect the scale a little bit so that there's a bit of stretch. And I do want to affect location. So we've got location scale. So let's select that active keying set. And on frame 1, down in the bottom left, we'll press I. So now if we go into the object data here, you can see that there's a keyframe for the location and for the scale. Before we continue, let's go into the output and let's change this to 30 FPS as well. So let's give this about 30 frames before we start to move the ship around. That'll make it so that when we cut to the shot, the viewer can take in the scene briefly before we start to animate it out of the screen. So we'll put another keyframe here by pressing I. And let's bump this forward maybe 10 frames for now. And I want to stretch this on the Y. So we'll scale by pressing S and Y. And we'll give that a bit of stretch. Let's go to the camera to see how that looks. Maybe even more. So it's about 1.5. I'm just going to be exact with 1.5. And hovering over this Y, we can tell that it's been modified since the last keyframe because it's orange. If we press I, now it turns yellow, showing that there's a keyframe for that scale. So if we play that back, you can see it stretches a little bit in anticipation. And then at some point, we'll go to frame maybe 70. We're going to want that Y to be really far in the distance. Let's try 300 even, or maybe 200. And press I there. And let's change the end frame to 70. Shift left arrow to go back to the start and press spacebar to play that. So we don't really see the stretch. What we're going to need to do, let's expand all these so that we can see the keyframes that we're dealing with. What we're going to need to do is move this keyframe a little bit closer to that 30. You can select the keyframe, press G and move that 1 or 2 frames ahead. And you can see the anticipation as it stretches backward and then goes forward. I might actually give that even more stretch. We've got 1.5, let's make it 2 and press I there again. And you can use the left and right arrow keys to scrub through those frames. And I like the feel of that it's starting to jump. Now by frame 70, it goes several hundred meters, but I think it needs to be even faster. Let's just move that keyframe, maybe even try frame 40. That's too much. What about frame 50? On this frame it's stretching. I don't want it to move yet, so let's put in a keyframe here just to lock that in place before it starts to take off. I think that might look a little bit better. And let's move that back a frame. Okay, so that's not bad. I think by frame, this is frame 48, it disappears. There's just a few frames where it's launching into the distance and then it's too far gone. And I think that's okay. This stretch might be a bit too big. So let's dial that back to maybe 1.8. And again, press I to lock that value in. And we'll play that back. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this, hit subscribe. I'm passionate about Blender and creating quality tutorials to help others learn. Your support helps the channel grow and brings more Blender content your way. Thank you. Now back to the tutorial. All right, so let's go into solid mode. Press Z to go into solid. And let's add that star field. We've got this extra light here. Let's Shift A and we'll add a mesh plane and rotate that on the X-axis 90 degrees. Go into camera view. Let's scale this up so that it's outside the camera view itself. And let's press GY50 just to push that back and keep scaling it so it covers the whole camera area. All right, let's jump over to geometry nodes and we're going to add a setup to this. We'll keep the input geometry and we just want to distribute points on faces. And again, we'll lock into the camera view here. We can change the density and Shift A to bring in an instance on points. For that instance, we'll put on an icosphere. I don't think we need too many subdivisions on these. They're just going to be tiny dots in the distance. And for the scale, let's pull in a random value so that these are all randomized. And you can adjust the min and the max here. Min can be 0, 0, 1, max maybe 0.8. Well, how does that look? That's not too bad. I think the max I'd crank down a little bit more, so maybe 0.5. If we adjust the density to maybe 500, how does that look? I like that a little bit better. Okay, so now we can set a basic material. Shift A to bring in set material, change that to material, which we can adjust here by pressing new. And so let's just call that stars and change that to stars as well. Okay, so go into emission, we'll leave the color for now, strength maybe 100, and go into rendered. Definitely a little too bright, so let's change that to 10 maybe. And let's give that a bit of a warm tone. Let's Alt-Shift-Z to hide the outlines. And those are definitely still too big. Still too big, still too bright. That looks a lot better. In the camera, let's press GZ to raise that up just a little bit. Press GZZ to zoom out. So now if we shift left arrow to go to frame 1. Okay, I think I see something. Let's select the empty here and let's go to animation. Let's change this from dope sheet to the graph editor, and let's expand all this. This Y location here, you can see how it's got this ease in and ease out. Let's change the shape of this graph so that it instantly accelerates into hyperspace, because right now it's got this slow transition and a slowdown too. So what we can do is, we've got this Y location selected, press Shift H to hide all the other curves. And you can press tilde to frame all. We just need to find the keyframe and press V and vector. So if we bring our playhead here, it instantly takes off into the distance. Same with this keyframe. I'm going to press V for vector, and now it's just a straight line. So now there's no kind of easing. There's no ease in, no ease out. And it quickly disappears into the distance. That's looking pretty good. Okay, so the final thing that we'll animate now is the plane. So let's select the plane and go to frame 1, and we will put on this rotation on the Y-axis. We'll press I to add a keyframe there. And what we want to do is, if you look closely at some Star Wars jump shots, it slowly starts to rotate when the ship is still on screen. But by the time the ship is gone, it's rotating a little bit faster. So we'll ramp up the spin of the star field. So let's move the playhead to about right where it's about to take off. And we can start to turn this Y. So let's do frame 30. We'll press I on the rotation. And then by the end of the shot, you can press Shift right arrow. And we can put in, say, 90 degrees and press I. We'll just see what that looks like. And the same thing for this handle. Let's set that to be a vector because we don't want any kind of easing out at the end. So let's take a look at that spin. It's way too fast, and it might be really hard to see on screen. So maybe what let's do is expand all of these, and again, Shift H to hide all the other curves. And this value here, let's press G, Y, and bring that down and play that back. That's not too bad. I might actually give this a bit more time to spin, which means this keyframe needs to go to the very end. And a quick trick to do that is you can move the playhead to the end. You can also just use the Shift right arrow. And with this keyframe selected, you can Shift S and then say selection to current frame. And that'll snap that keyframe all the way to the end. All right, so let's go back. It's looking not too bad. It's a little slow, so I'm going to G, move that up on the Y. I think that's a good speed of rotation. Yeah, I like that. Let's select this keyframe down here and press GX. GX. And let's have it start spinning a little bit sooner, so I just moved that a few frames. Let's set this up to render. We want to go into the render properties. We're going to turn on ray tracing. We definitely want motion blur here. So let's set this to start a frame. Just crank these up to 1000, maybe 256 max blur. How many steps can we do? 64. So let's just preview that. If we move our playhead to where the ship starts to move around frame 30, you can see this blur effect as you scrub with the mouse, especially right there. That looks really cool. And that's going to give it a much better sense of speed. Okay, so with motion blur on, we can go to color management and we can look at the high contrast or very high contrast. Let's leave it to set to high contrast for now. And let's go into the output. We'll change this to FFmpeg video and change the encoding from Matryoshka to MPEG-4. Video codec is good. Output quality set to perceptually lossless. And go up to your render menu and render animation.